Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is James, and today we are going to be talking about this beautiful picture here, which is an image of the Emperor. The Emperor is a much part of this storyline that I've created called Imperia, which last time we discussed when we met the Empress, and we talked about some of the little parts of Imperia. And now we're going to be talking about the Emperor here, who we see before us, who is very much a part of this storyline. So here, this image is sort of done when the Emperor was in his sort of later life. We could say maybe late 50s, early 60s. So he's more or less in his later years, but he still looks every inch magnificent. And this is a time when the Emperor is at the height of his powers. So his empire is expanding all the time, and so this is when the emperor really is at the height of his powers, at the height of his wealth, and so this image here is supposed to represent that. We can see his clothing is all very French. He's got underneath his robes there. You can see his pantaloons and the lace, and all down his cuffs is just lace overlapping each other, so enormous and huge, lace just flopping over each other, all the folds in the fabric, and the robes themselves are just spread all over the emperor, all over his front, all down his back. Now, this image here is actually a inspiration off of Louis XV, because the emperor and Louis XV are very similar in that aspect. The emperor's name is Maximilian Monarva de Charles, and he is the husband of the Empress consort. And so I wanted another image to go along with the Empress to represent the emperor at a time in his life when he was at his most glorious, like the Empress image is. So all down the emperor's back, you can see I've added more robes that kind of like fold and pile up at the emperor's feet. You can see the emperor's holding some of the robes in his left hand, and then his right hand he's holding the imperial scepter, which is enormous, and it's the same sort of size as the empress's scepter, which goes all the way down to the floor. And you can see it's topped off with this fleur-de-lis shape, which I have altered and changed to make it sort of more my own. And typically, the fleur de lis is a symbol for the French monarchy of the Bourbons, but I've used it myself and reinvented it so that it could be a symbol for the imperial monarchy of the de Charles line. Of which Maximilian is very much a part of. His dynasty had been going on for about 500 years at this point, so they had built up a huge fortune over the expanse of the empire. So when the 18th century rolled around, which is very much the part which this story is set in, the monarchy is at its height, really. Purely absolutist, had been for a very long time. All the kings and queens, the emperors and empresses were absolute monarchs. The power between the monarch and the consort, or the queen or the empress, is split equally between them both. So in this idea of this world, not all of the power goes to the emperor, but it's split between the emperor and the empress. So yes, so this image of the emperor is probably one of my finest pieces. I think I've really outdone myself here with this image. I think it's absolutely magnificent. I'm so proud of it. So on the emperor's head, he has lots of like flowing locks, all sort of cascading down his shoulders and his back. That is because at this stage of the emperor's life, he started to wear wigs because his hair started to recede, being the age that he is and the time of life that he's reached. His hair unfortunately did start to recede, so he did start to wear more elaborate and larger wigs. Men at the royal court of Strasbourg typically dressed more Louis XIV, and the women tend to dress more sort of Marie Antoinette, 18th century, wearing floral sort of light colours. So whereas the men dressed 17th century, the women tend to dress more modern 18th century style of dress. So there was a huge conflict, really, in terms of fashion, because one half is 100 years in the past, and another half is 100 years in the future. So it's all a bit unusual. So on the Emperor's head, you can see also he's wearing a crown, a very oversized royal crown, and it's the same shape and framework as the Empress's crown, who we met last time and discussed and had a look at. Um, you know, they only really wore these crowns on special occasions like their coronations or really, really important events. Usually they would just have them displayed in royal portraits and that sort of thing. But because this one is, it's a glorious picture of the emperor in his coronation robes, he wears his crown as a symbol of absolute power and his position. You can see on top also there is another fleur-de-lis shape with these enormous feathers draping off the top. Now the royals, the imperial family, tended to wear ostrich feathers like this to kind of assert their position, because the white ostrich feather symbolized their position at court, because the feather represented the imperial family, the white color, whereas the aristocracy would wear grey colours or light grey colours in their hair and on their crowns, etc. So that the white feather, the white ostrich feather, was a symbol of the imperial family, and on all of their crowns and sceptres they would always have them added, making them sort of tower above people, because had added them feathers on top really sort of added to their height of their costume, but I think it looks really beautiful and different, and that's what I love about it. As you can see all over the Emperor's robes, the emblem is also printed on there. This image is more simplistic, I think, because there's not a lot going on in the background. There's some drapery happening, and there's some columns, but there's not a whole lot going on. I wanted the focus to be on the Emperor and how mighty he is and glorious he is. And I really think, that really, it just frames him. I tried to make the background quite dark so that the Emperor would really stand out. But yeah, this is a fantastic image of him. So the Emperor, in his lifetime, although he looks magnificent here, and like a really a powerful emperor, um, you know, during his life, he wasn't actually that popular. He wasn't actually that liked much, really, because at the start of his rule, he was quite popular, and people saw this as a new age, because in this part of the world, in the storyline, in this new age, the 18th century was really a time of enlightenment and change, and monarchies were seen as quite autocratic, and even though these are absolute monarchs, they really wanted to try and sort of look as though they were educated, but they still, to us, would look quite autocratic and that sort of thing. So things really tried to change, but essentially, yeah, it never really developed and remained quite old regime for quite a long time. But yeah, so the emperor was popular at the start of his reign, but then later on in his life, he didn't really set himself a good reputation, really. He was a great womanizer, and there was nothing wrong with that, because monarchs at the time were encouraged to have mistresses and dalliances, because they had their official wives, which was their companion, who they would have produce heirs with, such as the Empress. But the emperor also had mistresses, because he was a great womanizer, and that's why I say he's a bit like Louis XV in that way, because he was a great womanizer and he had lots of mistresses like Louis XV did, and so he had this official mistress who came along. He met her, and they became great companions, and the relationship started off as a sort of, silly sort of dalliance that didn't really go anywhere, but they formed a great connection. And so this is when the infamous Madame de Monti was installed at court as a sort of vicomtesse. She was installed in court, and the king having an official mistress was a very acceptable position, as long as she was aristocratic, from aristocratic blood. It was acceptable. because it was seen as the monarch was acting in a very masculine manner if they had a mistress. Um, you know, so the emperor had Madame de Monti installed at court, and even though she had a title of Vicomtesse, that was only, symbolic, because it was created for her in order for her to be accepted at court. But actually, she was not aristocratic. She was not of any kind of noble family. Her background was quite unclear, really, of her origins, etc. But everyone knew at court that she was not aristocratic. Everyone knew at court that she was not aristocratic. So, she was disliked. All the snobs at court really disliked her because of her kind of, um, you know, she wasn't really suited for the whole court experience because she wasn't like the rest of them really. But that's why she was disliked. But in fact, she was very intelligent and very beautiful, and she made the emperor very happy. But you know, but they remained together for about 20 years. Madame de Monti and the emperor remained together for that long time, and she stayed as his official mistress for that time. Their relationship started off as very sexual, very intimate. They would always sleep together when they saw each other. But later on in their life, as the emperor got older and less sort of able, they became more kind of just like companions, and together they were like a sort of old couple, like an old married wife and husband, because that's the way they appeared. The emperor had this magnificent palace built in the grounds of Strasbourg, a sort of private estate, away from the official palace, where he could live with his mistress, away from the prying eyes of the court. And they sort of lived there in like marital bliss. They lived together as if they were married. They did produce a lot of illegitimate children together, and they remained at this country residence of the emperors. They lived there, you see, and Madame de Monti did have an apartment in the official palace, but she was permanently installed at this kind of private residence, and she had her own apartments and her own quarters there, so she was perfectly able to live there away from the court. She was quite disliked anyway, so the emperor installed her in his private house away from the court, and whenever he visited there, she would be there, obviously. But he stayed there quite a long time. Usually, when he visited, he would stay there for months on end. He wouldn't go back to the palace only for official functions. He would stay there with her, living as this unmarried husband and wife, living in this very domestic environment which the emperor so much craved. He did not like the pomp and the splendour of the court, despite his portrait here, but he did not like the idea of the grandeur and the public rituals at court, which was performed every day. He did not like that aspect of court life. That's why he preferred to be away, you see. At Strasbourg, there was very strict etiquette, like at Versailles, you know. And Strasbourg itself, I have explained it before, it is this enormous palace which the Emperor and the Empress designed together. They built it together, um, you know. But as the Emperor, slowly lost interest in the main project and preferred to spend time at his country house, he would do his building projects there, and he sort of abandoned his projects at Strasbourg. So as he was living away from the palace, the emperor really made it his life's dream, really, his private residence. But the empress made Strasbourg her palace. Everyone knew that she wore the trousers because she was the one who took on the role of monarch, sole monarch, even though the emperor still retained his position and power, but he just preferred not to be around court life and did not have an interest in daily sort of court life and government life and performing acts of government. He preferred to be away from all of that. So the empress really sort of took on the role of sole ruler. She was the one who attended council meetings, etc. Took on all those things, really. She took on the acts of government on herself, and she really gained a lot of popularity, and everyone saw her as the main monarch, and whenever they went to functions together and state visits, she would be the one who would be cheered on more than the emperor because she was more recognized. because everybody knew that she was the one responsible for the running of the empire. So she really had a lot on her plate, really, just for one person. This empire was an enormous size, and the Empress really had to take on the role of running this enormous empire, guided by these counselors. She held all of the absolute power, and yeah, she was extremely fortunate in that aspect with her popularity. The Emperor and the Empress did produce a son together. Well, actually, they produced several children, several legitimate children. They produced two sons. They produced Augustus, who was the firstborn heir to the throne, emperor to be, who we might meet another time. And then there's also Ferdinand, who was a much quieter, more feminine sort of boy, and we'll talk about him in the future. Um, I call him feminine because he liked to be around the company of women, but he was not physically attracted to them. So this makes him quite interesting, I think, because he did not share the same interests as his brother Augustus, who was very sort of, he liked the company of women for specific reasons, whereas Ferdinand preferred the company of women, but did not want to do anything with them intimately. He had male companions. If did Ferdinand, he had male companions, and yeah. So I call him feminine. That's not really the right term, but you know, Ferdinand was so different to his brother in terms of personality. Um, but yeah, so Augustus was the heir to the throne, and throughout the emperor and the empress's life, building work continued at Strasbourg, all over the estate, but mainly it continued on the main palace itself because the empress shared the same sort of interest as the emperor. They were both very sort of prolific builders, and they liked to build exotic and grand buildings. So throughout the life of the monarchy, Strasbourg continued as a building site for about 100 years, even after the empress's death. There was still building works going on that she commissioned, because she was still signing commissions in her deathbed. As she was laying there, sort of, she was still signing paperwork saying, commissioning new projects. So when she died, her son Augustus continued on the building projects of his mother. Augustus was not much of a builder like his parents, quite a shy boy. He did well in terms of being emperor, but he wasn't necessarily as successful as his predecessors. So I hope that was interesting for you guys. I love talking about Imperia, I really do, because it's such an interesting subject for me, and there's so much to it. I mean, I think it would make a lovely series. Something similar to I don't know, just some kind of costume drama, but it would be about this fictional world. I just think it'd be such a good idea. But anyway, yeah, thank you for listening. And yeah, I hope you found that somewhat interesting on my video there, talking about the Emperor and the Empress and their lives. We will meet various other members of the imperial family eventually. Next time. I think we'll meet Augustus, and then Madame de Monte, and all the children of the Emperor and the Empress, and various members of the court who are of importance to the story. So with that said, I appreciate you listening to this. We'll see you later. Take care. Bye bye.